Hi everyone, and welcome to my talk today. So the title of my talk, How to Give a Technical Talk That People Actually Listen to. My name is Laura Hyatt, I'm a cloud engineer here at Google Cloud, and I've been giving technical talks for a very long time, but it is something that I have had to learn and to really sort of practice and hone in on those skills, because as you know, engineers, developers, architects, whatever we are sort of experts in, doesn't necessarily mean that we're actually great at conveying that information to other people. You know, I've given a lot of talks, I've also listened to a lot of talks, and sometimes it's very difficult to be able to convey that sort of really technical information that you've learned over a long time, but the audience doesn't know. So today I want to give you a talk about how you can structure your technical presentations to make sure that your audience get the best out of what you want to tell them. But before we get into it, I just wanted to give you a little bit of a brief overview of who I am and why I guess you should listen to me. So my name's Laura. As I said, I'm a customer engineer at Google. I look after primarily financial institutions, and I'm also the tech leader for EMEA for Google's Women Tech Maker program. I've had a lot of experience, as I said, in giving technical talks over the years. In previous sort of work life, I also went around the world giving technical talks at sort of big name conferences such as AWS's reInvent and some of the localized summits around Europe. And I was also previously a speaker bar raiser, which basically meant that I mentored and trained other people to be able to give good presentations. All right, so let's kind of dive into this then a little bit. Let's talk about what we're going to do today. So we're going to be talking about how to sort of craft a great technical presentation. And really sort of the structure of this is how to structure your presentation. And then within that, I'll give some do's and don'ts of kind of effective presentations. But it's really important to really think about the way that you structure your presentation. I understand often we kind of just want to rush into saying, I want to tell you everything I know about whatever it is, cloud computing, Java, Python, whatever it is that you want to talk about and you're obviously really passionate about. But you need to stop, think about the structure of it and the story that you want to tell. And so that kind of leads into what is the sort of the goal and the message that you want to convey. Because this isn't just a let me tell you about something that I find interesting. There needs to be a purpose to the technical presentation. And really that is about defining the goal, knowing the audience, and then thinking about what do I want my audience to feel, do, or think as a result of the presentation. Because actually, you are not the most important person in this presentation. Your audience is, because they are coming to you. They've taken the time out of their day, their evening, whatever it is, to listen to your presentation, the same as you've taken your time today to listen to my presentation. And so the goal is to give something back to you. Obviously for this, it is that I impart hopefully my wisdom onto you about how to give a better presentation, and you walk away with better knowledge about how to give technical presentations. So whatever it is that you are creating, there has to be something the audience gets out of it. Now, obviously, kind of when it comes to a technical presentation, it's probably going to be some, knowledge that you're imparting on them, but also could equally be something about the way that they think about tackling a technical problem or structuring their working style or something. But equally, obviously, this applies to other types of presentations as well, and you might want them to sort of think about something as well or feel something. So really, that is actually what you need to start with. So at the beginning of your presentation, before you start creating slides or anything, write down or type whatever it is your preference. What is the goal of the presentation? What do you want your audience to get out of it? Because they are the most important part of this presentation. So, okay, you've kind of thought about what you want the objective to be of the presentation. How do you then go about telling it? Well, it's telling a story. So there's nothing different about a technical presentation as such than a non-technical presentation. And actually, I think that's sometimes what we forget that still technical presentations are still just storytelling, just with technical information. So really, this is kind of the general structure of storytelling. Introduction, problem description, solution, results, and conclusion. So let me just sort of talk about these. So the sort of storytelling introduction. This is where you are going to introduce yourself, the topic, and the motivation. So as I just said, what is that you want your audience to get out of it? Why are you giving this? The problem description. What is the problem that you are trying to solve? Or what is the purpose? So going more into depth about what your audience is going to get out of this, right? The solution is, okay, this is where you really dive into the meat of it, right? So this is your technical component where you're going to talk about architecture designs or coding or whatever it is that you are talking about. This is the sort of the meat of it and how you are, and the solution basically is the solution to the problem. And then the results is actually one of the crucial elements that often people forget. They talk about the solution, right? And talk about, you know, kind of here's my lines of code, here's something I designed, obviously get super interested. But what does that achieve? And that's really important because we're not just doing technology for technology's sake, right? There has to be a reason why we're doing it, and that is what the results are. So what did this achieve? And then finally, you want to wrap it up with a conclusion, because often again in presentations, you know, the audience has been listening for a long time, but you want them to take away something. So usually the conclusion is you want to kind of just very quickly reiterate what they've learned, but also what they should take away from this as well, to really give them something at the end of the presentation to think about as they walk out of, you know, the theatre if they're watching it, or walk away from their screen if they're doing it remotely like this. So the way that I have structured my talk today is actually walking you through a presentation that I've done in a previous life, to kind of just give you an idea of how I've structured things and kind of give you a visual representation of what I'm talking about. So this was a presentation that I gave many years ago, but is still very relevant. And this is why architectural resilience matters. So resilience is my speciality. And it's a presentation that I gave actually in Vegas on a stage. And so I'm going to use some of the slides to kind of structure about what I mean by that storytelling. So let's talk about the introduction first. You need to introduce obviously the topic that you're going to do, but also yourself as well. And so, you know, this can be something, you know, on the screen and also what you say. So as you'll notice at the beginning of this talk, I had my picture. Obviously you can see my face as well, but a picture's great as well. And I just said, you know, what my name is, the company that I worked for, my title, and also I put my LinkedIn as well. So put any kind of like social presence that you're comfortable with people reaching out to you on. You know, for example, my Instagram is really just for friends and family, so I wouldn't put that down on a work presentation. But then also talk about sort of what you do and why people should listen to you in this talk. So it's really establishing your credentials. Now make it short and sweet. This doesn't have to be a long thing, and actually you want to keep it short. You don't need to give your life history. If people want to know more about you, they can ask you questions, but really this is just relevant information to this. So as I said, what I did, and I also said, you know, in the context of this, my credentials around public speaking and why you should listen to me. But also I've just put some sort of things there. If it's depending on what the audience, if it's a more relaxed thing as well, you might want to give some little tidbits about things that you do in your spare time as well, depending on kind of the audience and the context. So for example, I always mention my dog if relevant, so you might want to put that. All right, so this is just a quick thing as well. If you want to do some more reading after this about the power of a good introduction, this is a sort of really great sort of piece of information that you can have a look at, that I just thought would be good to kind of give you some homework, you know. Now we don't like to talk about homework, but it's always good to do some further reading. All right, so talking about then the actual sort of meat of the presentation and the introduction side of things, this is kind of a slide that I had, and obviously as I was talking about resilience, this is almost the roadmap of the presentation that I was giving and to outline during this presentation, these are the topics we're going to cover, this is what you're going to learn. And I very much made it kind of a flow, right? So we talk about best practices, how you can model, how you can do recovery planning, and then how you can kind of do incident analysis and learning after, you've recovered from a disaster. So I kind of really laid out the foundation of what we're going to cover over the course of the talk. And that's as much as you really need to do. Now, as a little sort of extra bit, right? I sometimes like to add in what I call the hook. Now, depending on the context of the talk, the audience, the setting, you might not want to do this, or you might want to tailor it. It's really dependent. But I like to, if it's, I feel, a more relaxed setting, I like to add in a little something, just a bit of fun to get people almost get them awake, right? Because sometimes you go to conferences and it could be talks back to back after back. And, sometimes the audience sits there, you're losing them, especially if you've kind of got, the end of the day slot. It can be a bit hard to kind of get your audience kind of awake and attention. So sometimes I like to add in something a little bit fun. So for my talk on resilience, I added in a little element of Star Wars. Can never go wrong with that. So I showed this and basically said, what does the Death Star teach us about resilience? And basically, I just made a really fun kind of comparison. The Death Star, because it was destroyed by, a single shot that was made very, accurately, but it destroyed this entire, super laser capable destroying planet machine, shows us that actually there was a single point of failure that brought down the entire thing. So I kind of like to just sort of add in a little bit of something fun. It gets the audience kind of going, oh yeah, I understand that. So again, depending on what the audience is, you might want to add in something a little bit fun, cultural reference points, things like that, if you're comfortable with it. All right, so let's dive into the next bit, problem description. So again, what are you trying to solve? Now you might think, well, I'm not trying to solve a problem. I'm just trying to tell you about something that I've learned, a new architecture method that I've gone through, or, in depth into, Kubernetes or something like that, right? But actually everything is solving a problem. If you think about it, you're looking at in depth in Kubernetes. Okay, so the problem is, it could be that the audience is new to Kubernetes and doesn't understand how to use it correctly, and so actually you're trying to teach them. Now, this is where, though, that you could just say, I'm going to dump a load of information in this talk about Kubernetes, but that doesn't make a very good talk. You really need to focus in on it, because you're not trying to boil the ocean. People aren't going to take in all of that information in one go. Really focus on sort of one or two specific things in that. So Kubernetes, it could be, if we're just going out, I want to tell you some information, it could be, I'm going to teach you how to do cluster management better, right? And the problem is that the audience doesn't know how to do cluster management well. And so that is what you're going to teach them. Or in my case, I was talking about architectural resilience, and why does it matter? Because often people don't think resilience is that important. It tends to be left, until after a disaster has happened, and then it's, oh gosh, we probably should have done that. So my kind of problem statement was, this is why it matters, and I'm going to teach you about how to actually do it in a simple way. It doesn't have to be this huge task. Actually, you can make small changes and you'll become much more resilient. So that's what kind of the problem is I have and what the outcome will be. So, and this is obviously what I did for the presentation. I tried to make it a little bit of interactive with some of the slides, but essentially as each of these went past, I would say, okay, I understand that often, you might have deadlines, or customers asking for certain features, or even security comes ahead of resilience, or for example, you might need to fix bugs, or just the cost of it gets in your way at looking at resilience. But if we then think about resilience, it's important because if you're not resilient, actually it will cost you lots of money in terms of an outage, etc., etc. So that's kind of the problem statement as I'm talking about. These are all the issues why people don't do it, but I'm going to teach you why actually it's easy to do. And this is then I kind of just put it into obviously kind of text format as well, because it's also important to visually show these on the screen, because as much as obviously your words are the most important thing and we shouldn't have walls of text on the screen, sometimes it's important to have those visual anchors almost to help people ground what you're saying. They can, you say words that are also on the screen, they go, oh yeah, and it kind of just locks it into people's minds. So, okay, you would talk about that. You would talk about the problem, what you're trying to solve. So then how are you going to solve it? And this is really where obviously the kind of the fun part, I guess, goes, the solution. So what is it, the technical part, the technical meat that you're trying to showcase? Now, this is often then when I say technical talks could fall down, because as techies, we want to showcase, our code and the way that we've architected something or developed something, whatever it is. But we need to really remember, you are not just there to kind of go, look how amazing I am, I've developed this cool application. You are there for the audience. The audience is the most important part, and I'll keep reiterating that. You must think of your audience at all times. And often it can be that we get, kind of bogged down into the technical details that we know, but our audience does not know. You need to teach them. So just very quickly, for this, I very much outlined it about here's kind of 4 steps that you can take. Again, make it clear, make it simple, make it a journey that your audience can go on to learn what you are teaching them. There's no point in almost starting with a wham, here's a wall of code. Break it down, actually. Almost start non-technical and feed in the technical elements. So for me, it was that, we need to break down resilience and designing a resilient system into these 4 areas. And then I dive into each of those 4 areas, obviously the technical elements of them. But I'm bringing my audience on a journey and they're learning as we go. And by breaking it into these smaller components, people can follow along and go, okay, when she was talking about that particular architecture, we were talking about monitoring the system. When we were talking about these particular services and these particular elements, actually we're talking about how do we respond to a disaster. And it helps them, again, sort of remember the information. And again, obviously, I just included, some things from the console. Again, have some visual elements, always really helpful. So if you're talking about things that you've developed or built, it's important to have visuals. So often, you might be writing code using the command line, but actually if you could show it in a graphical format, even if you wouldn't normally do that, it's helpful for the audience to kind of understand it. They can recognize something a bit more logical on screen. And just to kind of, when we're doing the technical part and kind of the meat of it, this is where I was saying the most sort of the crucial elements not to kind of get bogged down is, so as I've kept on saying, you must know your audience. So kind of really think about that ABC, audience before content. Again, the audience is the most important element. You will hear me say this so much. But actually, you can also kind of do a bit of homework beforehand in understanding the type of audience, because depending on who you're speaking to, you'll then tailor your content to meet the audience's needs. Because if you are at, say, KubeCon, right, and you're talking about Kubernetes, the audience is going to be much more technical in the realms of Kubernetes, right, than if you're going to a sort of general tech day or something. And so you can get more technical and dive deeper with that KubeCon audience than you would do with, say, a Tech Meetup London, for example, where some people may know Kubernetes, some may not. And so you really need to tailor the level that you're talking at to your audience's level. So don't just blindly use the same presentation for every single presentation that you give. So you obviously research it. If you don't know, reach out to the organisers and ask them. They are the best people to tell you like who is going to be there. And then as we're doing that sort of that technical element, remove jargon. So I know you're thinking, okay, well, there's obviously in the world of tech, there is so much technical jargon, right? And actually it was interesting. There's a sort of little anecdote. I actually gave a presentation yesterday to a customer. And in the world of resilience and disaster recovery, there is so much terminology and sort of metrics and, sort of talk about RTO, RPO, SLAs, SLOs, all of these kind of words that if you don't know them, you don't know what they mean, they don't make any sense, and it can get really bogged down in it. And so actually I put up a slide with all of these kind of terminology words on and said, if you want to go and really master resilience, go learn about these. But in the context of at the stage we're at now, we don't need to know these. Let's remove them from this and let's just focus. And I picked out 2 particular areas, RTO and RPO, because I think they're kind of for sort of the beginning stages of your resilience journey, the most important. And I said, let's focus on these. I explained them and then use them throughout the presentation. So don't get bogged down in lots of jargon because your audience is not going to understand, depending again, obviously on the level of the audience. But remember, you're giving this talk, there's not a one-to-one, and so often it'll be hard to follow if you're then talking with all this terminology that they've never heard before, and they're going, okay, I think this meant that, and I think meant this, that. And if people then have to start playing it in their head, going, did she mean this, and does this terminology mean that, they're no longer concentrating on your presentation. And so just remove that. Remember, you are the expert, but you're not talking to the expert level unless it is a very specific talk and you're doing expert to expert. But then even then, the point of you giving the talk is that you know more than the audience, right? And you're teaching them something. So for the best part, just unless it is absolutely crucial for the story, remove the jargon. And then another element, walls of code. So this, as you're looking at this now on the screen, is really hard to read and to follow. Like I'm going, okay, I'm trying to look at this. Okay, what's this class here? What's that? Like, what is that saying? This is not a great storytelling mechanism, but that's not to say that we can't show code. Of course, sometimes we need to tell how we did something, right? But no one's going to remember this. No one's going to understand this looking at kind of a presentation. So you can sort of edit the way that you display code well. So there's kind of I guess the basics would be try to keep it to no more than 6 lines in one go. That's kind of been sort of analysed as kind of the best kind of amount that people can absorb on the go. If you can use syntax highlighting, then do that again, because it makes it easier to kind of quickly see, okay, this is that part, this is that part. It makes it sort of really easy to see. And again, don't have lots of code slides one after the other. So don't just go, okay, I'm going to have 20 slides with 6 lines on each, because that defeats the point. And then actually, if you do want to show code, one of the best ways is to break it down and make movement within it. So for example, like this, I'll have this, and then we go on to this line, talk about this, explain what it means. Let's go on to this. And basically, this really then helps stagger the audience and get them, as you're talking about it, you're talking about the visual representation, we'll talk about this line, then we'll talk about this line. And again, it helps them follow along. Okay, results. So as we kind of said, often people forget about the results, but this is really, really important. And so what does this mean? So the point of this presentation was, as we said at the beginning, to teach the audience something, get them to think about something, get them to feel something, right? So this is where then you are giving them that feeling, that thought, whatever that action, whatever it is, this is the crucial moment that really ties everything together. Because as I said at the beginning, while we are experts in our area, in our technical field, technology for technology's sake rarely exists or rarely works, right? For example, resilience, my area speciality. I really love talking about it. I think it's really important. But it's not just, resilience isn't there for resiliency's sake, right? It's because in the world of financial services, if there's an outage, customers can't, draw their money out or can't pay for goods in the supermarket, things like that. And so the businesses, your banks, etc., will want to be resilient and stop their payment system going down because they will lose money, they will lose reputation, customers will go elsewhere, regulation, like all these things, like that's the reason. And so when I'm saying, okay, here's how we can design a well-architected system, that's the reason for this technology element, is because of that. And so actually you need to talk about that. And so the results of designing a resilient system is that customers are happy, you're making money, you've got a great brand reputation, right? And so you need to convey that. Do this action, do this technical action, and these are the results that you will achieve. So actually, while you'll want to say, yes, these are the technical results, also, what is it that the audience is going to achieve non-technically? Because that's really important. And often that's kind of why the technology exists. You need to make sure you convey those too. And then finally, conclusion. So often I've seen many presentations just go, that's the end, that's done. And they go, okay, cool, okay, and then that's kind of done. But no, you need to wrap it up nicely, right? Like the end of a story doesn't just cut off and then it's the end. There's usually a kind of wrap around, and that's a really great way. And actually the conclusion is a great way to cement everything that you've learned and actually what you want them to take away after. Because actually you want this to have a lasting impression. And often there's something you want them to do. Now, obviously, again, thinking about my presentations, resilience, I'm like, I want them to go build resilient architecture. And so the way that you can do this is obviously wrap around kind of, okay, here's what you've learnt throughout today, and go through very quickly, just a few sentences. We started with this was the problem, we talked about this, we dived into this technology, these are the, here's how you do it, these are the results that you will achieve. And then you also want to do a call to action. Presenting is the art of persuasion at the end of the day. We might not want to think of it, but it is. You are persuading your audience, A, to listen to you and to take something away from you. And as I said, that could be an action, that could be a feeling, a thought, but it's still you're persuading them to do that thing, to have that thought, to have that feeling. And so it's really important. And so actually at the end of it, you want to have that call to action to be like, go and have a look at these things, go implement these strategies, this development process, whatever it is that I've told you, give them some information about how they do it, make it as easy as possible, and really convey, here's what you've learned, here's what you are going to do next. And so just as a kind of example, and again, I like to bring in, if you do the hook, I like to bring in it round, full circle. So saying, what the Death Star and you, I'm telling the audience, should take away from this. So then obviously kind of mention, here's what we've learned, here's the things that you can do. Obviously I've set it out into these 4 areas. So for example, I'm like, take automated action when something occurs, make sure you're doing testing, test with chaos engineering, implement a correction of error process. Like I talk through all of that. These are the things that you are going to do. And then of course, I like to just end, if only the Death Star had listened to this talk, this could have been the result. So I like to bring it full circle, leave it on a little high note so people sort of remember it. But essentially, that is the structure of a good technical presentation. You are offering your wisdom, your expertise to the audience, but not just for the sake of dumping information on them. It needs to solve something the audience is looking for, whether that is literally learning more about a topic, how to solve a specific problem, or just even feel better about the technology. But you are solving a problem they have, so make sure that you structure that in a specific way. So thank you so much for listening to this presentation. Hopefully that has given you some food for thought. As I said, make sure, if you want rewatch this presentation, take a screen grab of how to structure, a story, because it is all about storytelling. I would definitely, have a look into the art of storytelling, because while it is a technical presentation, it's actually not that different from another type of presentation. You just need to make sure you don't get bogged down in the technical detail, and actually the technical detail is to solve the customer's problem. So thank you so much for this. If you do want to reach out, ask any questions, feel free to message me on LinkedIn. And thank you so much for watching this. Have a great day. Bye.